Hey, this is the 21st and perhaps final installment of this series. Here then are some concluding remarks. Previously, I brought up ringleaders. To help us compare, here's a short list. Ringleader theory, the law of gravity, and labeling theory. Though not as irrefutable, unwavering, or as tight as the law of gravity, it would appear that ringleader theory is pretty hard to argue against. In other words, people want to believe that some, not all, but some, erstwhile innocent people can be talked into doing things, even atrocious things, by powerful ringleaders or masterminds. The authorities present to us a ringleader. We hear about what he or she told others to do. We examine the blood-splattered photos, and then it's off to the slammer for that rather persuasive person, with nary a peep. By our not even talking about taking steps, let alone taking steps, to free from prison the man who, it's rumored, orchestrated from a distance the Sharon Tate murders, for example, we are in essence saying by our inactivity that concert would not have taken place if that conductor had not tapped and flicked his baton with such panache. I'm not saying this conductor is all paid in full, i.e. that he's done paying his debt to society. Rather, I'm saying that since all of us, myself included, want him to remain behind bars, that we all agree that ringleader theory is pretty legit. Is it as immutable as the law of gravity? No. But it's close. For something that's man-made, it's pretty close. Related to, but a bit different than ringleader theory, is labeling theory, which admittedly has some kinks in it. Though many act as though they believe in the precepts of labeling theory, many others do not. Over the years, most, but not all, of my supervisors have tried to get more ant-like production out of me via the honey rather than the vinegar route. And though some would argue that that paycheck is carrot enough, and for everything else there's either nothing or the stick of unemployment, I doubt very many of these harsher paycheck is good enough managerial types would cotton to the educators of their children repeatedly calling their children stupid, because they wouldn't want their own to be labeled into thinking they're stupid, and then do worse in school, and subsequently in life, at least in part due to such labeling. Now, these naysayers may have a different way of describing how, why they wouldn't want a teacher to address their kids in such a negative fashion, but the word stupid is a label. And if your hackles rise up upon discovering that your child's teacher has been calling your child an idiot or dumb or stupid, then you're at least a fair weather fan of labeling theory. Be that as it may, there are those who don't lend all that much credence to this theory. And there are some ancillary parts of this tagging or stigmatizing oriented belief that I personally think are dubious. For instance, many practitioners have it that the younger a victim of stigmatizing labels is, the more likely that one is to accept one or more of those negative labels and act accordingly. I firmly disagree with the implied compliment to this aspect, which basically says, quote, an adult knows better and won't let any number of labelers or ringleaders influence him or her, end quote. I disagree with that. I said we don't want to negatively label anybody. If adults can't be labeled into behaving differently, then why have so many of my bosses tried to sweet-talk the adult me and my adult coworkers into more production? Because they know if they label their workers as better than, say, not-so-great workers, they'll get more and better work out of us. And this has been going on for quite a while, folks. We're no longer in the trial and error or experimentation phase. We're fully into the proven management style phase. Anyway, I think when it comes to getting more production out of workers, many managers believe in labeling theory. But when it comes time for some of these same managers to shake or not to shake their keys at low-income men whose only crime is shopping near them, they conveniently don't draw the connection between their key shaking and the creation of more rapists. Now, one of the pitfalls of relying too heavily on anecdotal evidence can be demonstrated right here. It's here that my personal example actually buttresses their case. In other words, in my case, the key shakers have, so far, not turned me into a rapist. Thousands of key shakers have shaken their keys at me over the last 30-plus years, but I still haven't raped. And most of my fellow victims of key-shaking labeling also haven't raped. But I think some of them have. Like Emil Durkheim wrote, all we can do is speculate and deduce. A person either believes in labeling theory, or she doesn't. Now, I might not know very much, but I know when I'm being negatively labeled, and I know I don't have to fall prey to that labeling. For example, I'll see a look of disgust or flat-out hate on a woman's face while she's making stabbing motions with her keys. It's not hard to figure out where her head's at. She's labeling me, but I know I don't have to become stigmatized. The thing is, there are plenty of other men who, though they know what it means when women who don't have palsy shake their keys at them, they may not know they can be negatively labeled into becoming rapists, with enough shaken by enough different women. One won't do it. Two probably won't do it. But after thousands of women all deliver the same baseless accusation towards some hapless guy who's never raped, he may very well ask himself, "Self, how can all these women be wrong about me? How can 3,000 out of 3,001 people think I'm a rapist, but only one of those 3,001 people think I'm not a rapist, me, and I'm right and they're wrong? How can that be?" This is a guy who hasn't been to a Chiefs game, which means he hasn't witnessed firsthand 0 women shaking their keys at him or anybody while at Arrowhead Stadium. In other words, he doesn't know the whole story. He only knows the false accusation half. He doesn't know the whole other half of this coin. Enough purposeful shakes of enough keys just might turn a guy like that into a rapist. The thing is, some of these guys don't know they can resist against this labeling. They're just reacting to the negativity of the looks of hate and the stabbing motions. Is there a connection between calling your daughter stupid over and over again, lowering her self-esteem accordingly, and then when she's 18 she just happens to end up twirling around a stripper's pole? I've been told there's a connection by labeling theorists. How many key-born preemptive strikes can be launched against a non-rapist before he just snaps? It's at this point that I'm like, why bother? And it is a bother. You're limiting yourself to the effective use of 1.5 hands if you're holding onto your keys the whole time you're inside a Walmart. Even if I'm wrong about men being labeled into becoming rapists, why take a chance that I might be right? With a defense weapon, keys, that won't help at all in a real rape situation, why take a chance that I might be correct about it being possible with enough shakings by enough different key shakers to label a non-rapist into becoming a rapist? Is it really that important to let that low-income guy know that you think he's a rapist? It's like these key shakers think they're performing a service for society or something. And that's on top of them shooing away those low-income men for their own personal financial reasons. So when you do something for yourself, plus, supposedly, you're also doing it for other females, well, that's when you've got God on your side. This calls for a sketch. Say I'm working in the yard, getting kind of grubby, sweaty, and I break a garden implement that I have been using to make furrows and hillocks. It's not the weekend, but it is my day off. It's my last day off for over a week, and I promised the wife this stuff will be done today. It's also fairly early, not yet noon. I really shouldn't blow off the whole day, and I need more sandpaper. Plus, I absolutely gotta get some wasp spray, and that could be a real ouch. So a trip to Walmart is definitely in the cards. And time is a factor, too. Okay, so here's the rub. Do I take time to get undressed, shower, put on my tux and cummerbund, or my Armani, or my Brooks Brothers, comb my hair, shop, then come home and get redressed in my grubbies, and resume getting dirtier and sweatier? I won't have to work in the dark if I just turn the ignition in my truck now, while I'm still sweaty. But, as you might imagine, I'm torn. If it were a Saturday, I might be able to get away with not putting on the Ritz. Anyway, the fact of the matter is, well, actually there are three facts of the matter. I could shop in my sweats, and then undoubtedly I'd have to once again try to ignore the negative labeling and just bristle cringe when I hear that telltale metallic clanking sound, the sound that lets me know just how much I don't stack up in the grand scheme of things, followed by my trying to cope by once again repressing it all and just basically keeping things bottled up inside. Anyway, blah blah blah. As discussed earlier, that plan works for me, but doesn't work for all other guys. Some of them end up raping. That's one. Two, I could play dress up, and because I'm viewed as more presentable, I just happen to find my future wife in the snack aisle. Or three, I get found by a headhunter, and instead of continuing to toil for peanuts at my present job, I find myself at a much better job 3 weeks later. And again, this headhunter saw me and started talking to me, and gave me his car in part because I had played dress up, instead of sniveling about time constraints and having to take an extra shower. Now, at this point, you might think dressing up is simply the bee's knees. But is it really a decent or wise move to be trimming your sails in the direction of finding a new wife while you're currently married? Karma says don't do it. In this narrative, if it were something of an inner debate, to shower or not to shower, and the tipping point sounded like this, well, I'll look good, which will then increase my chances of giggling with a strange yet alluring off-duty stewardess near the rototillers, which is way better than having her shake her keys at me. If that's the tipping point, and that's when your current relationship just might be circling the drain, because you're sort of starting to look around. Point being, you could spend more money on water, or electricity, or gas to heat that water, laundry soap, shampoo, deodorant, combs, dry cleaning, and many extra changes of clothes. Or you might think about investing in some marriage counseling instead. Hold on a second. What about that hiring professional? Why not dress up for his sake? The owner of the company he works for gets a great new employee, he gets a bonus, and you get a much better job. It's a win-win-win, right? Wrong. All of us working Americans wear three-piece suits? Is that the way it is? Not around here. Simply put, when I'm not wearing a lab coat and teaching people about science, my usual work outfits have been almost to the thread, not that much different from what I wear in my garden. Jeans usually, but sometimes sweats, t-shirts, dirty rugged boots. You get the point. A headhunter in my field is more likely to approach me if I'm wearing grubbies. So, what should I do then? Should I actually lower my chances of finding that higher paying job via a headhunter while shopping, and at the same time increase my water bills and dry cleaning bills, etc.? Is that what I should do, just so that I can continue adding to the myth that purports that the more money some guy appears to have, the better chance that that guy's not a rapist? I wonder how many American men have made conscious or unconscious decisions to play this dress up so you don't get keys shaken at you game before going to the store. It's not like the greeter at Walmart will point a stern finger at you and jerk her head toward the parking lot if you're dressed poorly. It's not like they charge more if you're wearing sweats. I should know. I've dressed both snappily and shabbily while visiting Sam's World. But so, is that it though? It's all about constantly boosting the economy. If we adult males buy new instead of used, if we buy more instead of less, then somehow this will be reflected in a lowered American rape rate. Okay, say I'm being talked into spending more on my appearance, as evidenced by fewer key shakers give me the business when I dress nicely than when I'm in my sweats. And by evidenced here, I'm referring to decades of research, carefully logged, meticulously categorized, etc., etc. And then I react to these key shakers by buying more. And I spend lots and lots of effort on looking more presentable and smelling less malodorous before I walk out that front door, no matter where I'm going. I get my regular work clothes in my work locker, and I sleep in comfy old pajamas. But other than that, I do my part to surge the U.S. economy in the above-mentioned shopaholic ways. If that's all there were to it, I'd say fine, whatever, no problem. I'd spend more on those things that make me look and smell gorgeous. Fewer women would shake their keys at me, which would have the direct benefit of making me feel better about being alive. But that's not all there is to it. First off, once again, it's not about me and my coping techniques. It's about millions of American men who are being fed this line, and they're buying into it. They're buying into the mentality behind it. They're reacting to the prodding of the stick, i.e. shaking keys, by goose-stepping away from that stick like they've been programmed to respond. And the carrot is supposed to be where that stick is not. Somewhere. Not everywhere, but somewhere. There's a reward somewhere, or so goes the line. A reward for working harder, working a second job, spending more on appearances, climbing, ceaseless climbing. Some say there are rewards for choosing the exact perfect moment to stab that business partner in the back and get away with it, and be the sole owner of what had been a joint venture. Stab too soon, and the business is too small to be profitable, yet too big to handle all by yourself. Stab too late, and, well, he owns the business, and you're on the sidewalk with a tin cup in your hands. So there's a lot to be said for timing. And if you do what you're told, or so goes the bit, if you work hard, work overtime, play dress up, spend more than you have to, and then next time spend more than that, if you play by the rules, then you'll get what you pay for. You went into a store, saw something you liked, and paid for it. How is it shoplifting if you exit that store with something that you were told if you put in the work, then it would be yours? I think some men think this is how the game of love is played. They've been trained to think that way, and they think that way. They're wrong, of course, both morally and criminally. After he rapes her, he needs to be doing 25 years, as discussed earlier in this series. And the woman he rapes, well, she may need counseling, a shoulder to cry on, a divorce from her rapist, no matter how much money he has, and more. Regrettably, she's been trained a different way. She's been trained to be the perfect victim, often just letting it happen, and then not calling the police. I'll return to how she's being trained in about 9 minutes. First, though, another analogy. If you're a heterosexual adult male, it's like you wake up one day and find yourself living in a completely closed society, like a company town, one where just about everything revolves around, say, the mine, which is owned by the same person who owns the company store, the company mess hall, the company cafe, the company internet cafe, the only taxi cab in town, etc. And you're thousands, well, might as well be millions of miles away from home, from where you came from. What I'm alluding to when I say completely closed society is the idea that Martian women aren't available. Here in America, we hetero males have one option, and it's like the owner of the mine, the owner of the whole town, is every woman. That's capital E, capital W, all one word, every woman. Vaguely, you remember the reason you came to this town, to this job, because it paid like 10 times what you were getting back home. And it does. Translation, it's much better to be a non-virgin than it is to be a virgin. But everything costs 12 times as much, little minor detail they conveniently forgot to tell you about back home. So you have to tighten your belt just to stay out of debt. And all you ever hear about is how awful shoplifting is. It's on signs everywhere throughout this company town. It's printed on the urinal cakes with a number to turn in violators. It's the reason why everything is so expensive, or so you're told, over loudspeakers, again and again. You've never seen or heard or smelled or felt or tasted anyone shoplifting, but it's all you ever hear about. It's on every memo, every billboard, every piece of office stationery, everything. I don't mean to sound heartless, but I have a question. How bad can it be? If he has enough money and he rapes you, then you don't call the police on him? Why don't you just pick up the phone and push a 9 and then a 1 and then another 1? But instead of doing that, all we low-income men ever hear about is this theft of services thing. It's what we hear when keys are shaken at us. We Americans, we're told price is supposed to be commensurate with risk. The riskier the endeavor, the more you can charge. But what happens when risk drops through the floor? What happens when an activity that used to be dangerous becomes less and less dangerous, becomes easier and easier to do and survive? With the inventions of the condom and the birth control pill, and with abortions being safer and safer, and getting safer all the time, shouldn't the cost of sex have gone down, and I mean way down, to reflect the fact that there is now very little chance of a woman dying during childbirth if she doesn't want to become pregnant? And historically, isn't the possibility of dying during childbirth the reason why women are almost always the ones who get paid for sex if they're copulating with males? So why hasn't the cost of sex gone down commensurately with how much the risks have gone down? Could it be in part because of all the hype and furor over all these purported thefts of services? We American men are supposed to be understanding. Women convince us that stranger rape is rampant. Wives and girlfriends have to charge more for their services because their services are being stolen from them so often and in such a horrific way. And the time frame they have to sell their services is limited. If you're a woman listening to this, you might think this has taken a turn for the worse, and on purpose, and that really the woman with 1.5 hands was this way all along. Well, yes and no. Let me be clear. This series of videos is and always has been all about lowering the number of actual rapes. Key shaking creates more rapists. The mentality behind key shaking is what leads to wives' girlfriends being raped by their men and then failing to call the police on those husbands' boyfriends if their portfolios are properly diversified. The more I've thought this through, the more it makes sense that it is not about men. It actually is all about women wanting there to be at least a few stranger rapes, a few violent stranger rapes that take place over there, preferably way, way over there, and hopefully to someone who's not a relative / loved one. A preponderance of American women want there to be a reason for them to continue charging more and more, charging what the market will bear, as it were, for something that grows on them like their fingernails. If someone paid me for my clipped fingernails, how hard would it be for me to grow more, turn it into a regular business? Not hard at all. Growing my fingernails is even less work than an involuntary muscle movement like making my heart pulsate. Proof? Fingernails and hair after death will still grow for a time. The heart? Not so much. A woman doesn't really have to do all that much to keep herself fit and or appealing enough to demand and collect an exorbitant price for access to her nether regions. But she does, however, have to keep the shoplifting myth alive and or hope that enough others vigilantly keep it alive. And it is a myth that those of us who are truly against rape are fighting against here. The myth is that it's some low-income guy jumping out at you from the bushes. I'm convinced, and I demonstrate why in my notes, that way less than 1% of all male-on-female rapes are of the complete stranger, parking garage, bushes, dark alley variety. Take those actual horrific rapes, in other words, the kind of raping that gets almost all of the publicity, and then combine those horrific stranger rapes with all other horrific rapes, which is to say, all other rapes, because all rape is horrific. Anyway, combine all rape together, and we still haven't topped the 1% mark as far as instances of sexual congress involving one male and one female. Now, about the other 99%. If we take all instances of a male and a female getting together sexually, and neither one of them can tell the difference between a Monopoly dollar bill and one printed by a U.S. Mint, those two can actually make love. Further, if we combine all of the lovemaking by these mentally challenged people with all male-on-female U.S. rapes, we still haven't bested 1% of all acts of sex that occur in this country. Of the remaining male-female couples, if she knows the value of a dollar and she voluntarily has sex with a man, she may call that interaction making love, but what she really did was engage in an act of prostitution. Minus the Crone-Chippendale exception, of course. A rarity if there ever were one, although technically it's still an act of prostitution, with the shoe being on the other foot. Now, about 8 or 9 minutes ago I alluded to women being manipulated into becoming the perfect victims. To this end I have 2 illustrations, one fiction, one non-fiction. Life does imitate art sometimes, and I think my second example, the non-fictional one, will illustrate just how much my first example, the fictional one, is played out in real life. In Joan of Arc, Mila Jovovich, playing the title character, is just starting to bloom, just starting to gain a reputation. She's been attracting the attention of crowds, rousing the rabble, as it were, but she's not yet a leader of soldiers. To take that next step, she's requested an audience with Charles VII, John Malkovich. He's worried about being assassinated constantly, and to him, she's little more than a stable girl or milkmaid. He's hesitant at first and refuses, but his advisors adamantly insist that it would be better to have her fighting for, rather than against, the crown. So, reluctantly, he agrees to see her, but just in case it's all a ruse, he has his double, Desmond Harrington, stand in for him, who dresses as him while he, Malkovich, puts on the attire of a middle-level bureaucrat, posing as a typical member of his court. Malkovich then observes the proceedings from the wings. Joan is led to his throne, and in about as much time as it takes to flutter her eyelashes, she rejects this impostor, telling him unequivocally and with a very intelligent look on her face that he's simply not Charles VII. He's in this room, she's told. If you can find him, you may talk with him. So, in a measured, leisurely pace, Jovovich then scans and strolls about the room, scrutinizing male after male, till her gaze lands on Malkovich. More eyelash fluttering, and then she addresses him by his royal title. So, is that it then? Here we have one of the most brilliant, powerful women of all time. And the secret of her success is that she can tell quickly how much money a man really has, and not how much he's faking like he has. So if a woman is smart, she knows who's fronting and who isn't. The quicker she correctly evaluates how big his wallet is, the smarter she is. Is this what we're teaching our future female leaders? And we're doing the above instead of helping our daughters with their math and science homework when they're in grade school, so they can be more deservingly represented in those fields as adults? Yeah, the above is from a movie, a fictional movie, but I've witnessed this kind of training in person. A short time before I met Twyla, I dated a Methodist pastor, and she had one child, a daughter, 9 years old. On about our third or fourth date, we toured her parish one afternoon, during which she, in a nearly non-stop monologue, not unusual for someone of the cloth, pointed out to her daughter which neighbors had money, what lucrative businesses they were in, who the lawyers and brain surgeons were, etc. All others received disdainful piffs, if they received any comment at all. It struck me like a brick in the temple. Why does a 9-year-old need to know how many acres some guy owns? It was also instructive and revealing. It was like she was showing her daughter how to size up potential clientele, and done right in front of me like it was nothing, like it was not out of the norm at all, like it was nothing to be ashamed of. Perhaps you've heard of stranger danger. The lesson I learned observing this minister was that she was teaching her daughter that if he had really expensive candy, then it was okay to hop in his van. Not only okay, it was a good idea. If one or two women had this attitude, we as a nation might not be heading toward Hades in a handbasket. As it is, I fear the exceptions are rare. That is, very few don't have this attitude. And collectively, though I know it's not all, it sure seems as if all of my American sisters are one steaming locomotive, clickety-clacking down the tracks hurtling toward another train, a bullet train no less, a train that's speeding in the opposite direction and on the same set of tracks. What this other train is an amalgam of some American men trained to think it's a good thing to stab their business pards in the back if it's timed correctly. Trained that if they buy something, they get to walk out of the store with it, even if the person in charge of delivering that purchasable product, i.e. access to her life-making apparatus with his life-making apparatus, is allegedly temporarily not in the mood. No, I'm not claiming to know exactly what causes rape or why rape happens. A critic might assail me with the following question. So, none of your five senses have ever signaled to your brain that a real rape was taking place near you or involving you? In other words, an in-person rape, not one on the telly? And yet you would have us believe that you know what causes rape? To answer that, I've heard a similar question, a question that at one point our NASA officials were compelled to answer. Before we went to the moon, at one point a rocket scientist or two asked a donor or two for tribute, and that money would be earmarked for a moonwalk. A representative for us donors, us taxpayers, then asked, "But you've never been. You can't tell me you've walked on the moon before. How do you know you'll be able to walk on the moon?" The problem with some conclusions is that they're little more than a rehashing of the thoroughly enough previously explored. Not my style. I'm all about being laconic. One new note, a prediction. If this ever gets any further than YouTube, I think it will temporarily lead to more key shaking, and for all the wrong reasons. But someday, maybe there will be a movement of us nose tappers, and the sound of our tapping will drown out the jangling shakers. One can only hope. There is more, plenty more, and it's in my notes.